Chris and Chris Talk Movies.
Hello and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Chris Ferry, and of course, as always, my co-host.
I am Chris Huddleston.
Today, we are very, very excited to be talking about the cult classic Flash Gordon.
What plaything can you offer me today?
The planet Earth.
What's happening?
It's an attack!
Pathetic Earthlings! Who can save you now?
Flash! They'll kill you!
Let's all team up and fight him.
Prepare for torture!
I want him.
Stop at nothing!
Flash, I love you! But we only have 14 hours to save the Earth!
Flash Gordon is still alive.
Gordon's alive? Die! Yes!
Must be my lucky day.
Okay, so that was actually a restored trailer for a 4K. Well, it's a trailer for the restored 4K anniversary edition, but I like that one better because the sound quality is so much nicer than the other one I could find. Do you have a synopsis for us, Chris?
I do. I have a very brief one from IMDb. A football player and his friends travel to the planet Mongo and find themselves fighting the tyranny of Ming the Merciless to save Earth.
Well, that is short and sweet and right
Very
to the
brief.
point.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, let's just get into it. I remember this one from my childhood for sure, but I haven't seen it in a long, long, long time. You proposed this one, actually. Was there anything simmering on your mind other than the fact that it's a little bit cult classic, definitely genre, definitely sci-fi, definitely kind of campy?
Yeah, that was pretty much it. And just that I hadn't seen it probably since elementary school. So that
What'd
was
you
about
think?
it. So this is a much like the black hole. I know for sure I saw the black hole in the theater. This I'm about 90% sure. I don't have as vivid a recollection as I did with the black hole, but I'm almost certain that I saw this in the theater. But I saw this a bunch of times on HBO, and loved it as a kid. So again, this is my first time seeing this as an adult, or even in high school or anything like that. I was kind of disappointed, I have to say. I like the black hole a lot better. It's super campy, which I think even as a child I understood that it's that it was kind of they were winking and everything, but the cast is really great. You have Ming is Max von Sydow. He's great in everything. Sam Jones, who played Flash Gordon, he was really good. You have Timothy Dalton in it. But it just, everything with it seems so cheap. And I thought the costume design for the most part was bad. You have the great, I guess you could say a score, but it's kind of the same song over and over again with Queen, which is fantastic. But beyond that, it just, I don't know. I was pretty disappointed because it just seemed very cheap and very campy, but not too much in a fun way. You know what I mean? I don't know. What did you think?
It was a little slow, interestingly, for a movie that's so
Yeah.
packed with action sequences.
Right.
And you know what I want to talk about specific things, but what really leapt out at me is during the credits, it's a Dino De Laurentiis picture, and he did Dune, he did he did a lot of stuff, but we had just watched Dune. He did Serpico, right? And we watched the Stallone film that made me think of Serpico. He made 3 Days of the Condor, which is a great movie.
Oh yeah.
Blue Velvet, Conan the Barbarian, The Dead Zone. We could watch that one. Do you remember The Dead Zone?
I love the Dead Zone.
maybe we need to do The Dead Zone next, because
the Dead Zone is
I'm
great.
reading Wikipedia here, and I had forgotten about that movie. But just speaking of Dino De Laurentiis, it's like it's the time, but what surprised me somewhat about this movie was kids movies nowadays, they're just a different animal. And this was definitely, I think, a kids movie. Did you think this is not a kids movie?
No, I felt like it was very much a kids movie, but you continue with your thought. But there was something about it that I thought was funny for a kids movie. But go ahead.
Well, a bunch, and that's what I want to get into right now. So there's just a lot of adult themes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Without anything being explicit, like there's torture.
Well, you have I don't mean to interrupt, but you have the daughter of, so I was thinking exactly the same thing. You have the daughter of Ming, who's this beautiful woman, and there's a part where they torture her and they have her like sprawled out on her stomach, and she's in these tight pants and heels, and everything, and then they're whipping her on her back, and then I thought, this is kind of odd for a kids movie. And then there's a scene where Dale, who is the love interest of Flash, they have her and Ming's daughter, and they're kind of rolling around on this big bed, and I was like, I don't know, I felt like they threw in this kind of sexual stuff that was an odd for a kids movie.
A lot of sexual stuff. Like, it's not that there's a lot of skin.
No.
Again, there's nothing explicit, but Ming has got like this magic ring that I don't, it's science fiction, but he's got some like ring of power that compels people to do stuff. And he makes Dale, who is the ingenue, do this kind of sexy shimmy thing where he's sort of virtually molesting her, controlling her mind and making her, again, she's fully clothed, but she's doing this kind of, I don't know how to describe it. She's sort of caressing the air around her and caressing herself. And it's to say it made me uncomfortable is inaccurate. I mean, whatever. It's not that, but it was like, I was struck by, I was like, this is some adult stuff. Like, there's nothing the censors could really pin anything to, but it's like they were trying to do an end run around some of that. And it's Max von Sydow is Ming, and he's great.
He's fantastic. He's really.
Well, I mean, he's great in pretty much everything he does, but he really chews up the furniture in this. And we'll put a pin in Ming because I want to talk about racist elements in the property, just which is a 50s thing anyway. But his cruelty and the cruelty of his people is, again, saying it's shocking is too strong a word, but for a kids movie, it's like I would have a little exclamation point over my head. I was like, I remember watching it as a kid. And okay, so here's one sort of graphic moment that stayed with me as a child, but didn't make any sense at all in rewatching. So his right-hand man is a guy named Clytus, and he's wearing this sort of hooded, looks like a Jedi robe with a hood, and he has a golden face mask. And watching it now, it looks to me just like he's a guy in a face mask. But
I thought he was Did you think he was
Yeah.
really scary when you were a kid?
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
didn't
I
know
did
if he
too.
was a robot
Mhm.
or a cyborg or what his deal was. But anyway, long story short, when he meets his demise, he dies on sort of this floating platform that has spikes in it, this one-to-one combat.
Mhm.
Spoiler alerts, by the way, we're going to talk about everything in this movie. And he dies, and then there's a sort of so he just gets impaled on a couple, 3 spikes, maybe that are maybe a foot long. So they go through him, and there's not blood or anything, but then it shows a close up of the mask, and his eyes and tongue extrude through the mask in this, and it's a practical effect
Mhm.
where it's like now that he's dead, somehow it's like as though he's being crushed or something, and his organic material is coming out through the holes. And so I want to talk about this on a couple of levels. One, ooh, like I know we want to underline the fact that this is a bad guy and he dies in a particularly grisly way because there's a sort of a karmic satisfaction to like go good. This like in Raiders of the Lost Ark where you watch the guy's head explode and then another guy melts, like
And there's
there's
a
like, yeah, you deserve that. But then there's like, well, so he just got impaled on somebody else gets a sword put through him and his eyes and tongue don't squirt out of his head. You're like, why?
Mhm.
What's happening here? Do you know the moment I'm talking about?
I do. Yeah, absolutely.
What was your take on that? I mean, was it just a gratuitous like we need a punctuation point here, or
Yeah, and I think I don't know. I think the 70s and 80s were just a different time, I think we were kind of subjected to a lot of stuff as kids that maybe we shouldn't have seen. Uh but like with the sexual stuff, for example, I think, Return of the Jedi, you know, uh Princess Leia in the metal bikini,
but
Um
how bad? So again, but there's a fair amount of skin. Like that's a very sexy outfit,
mhm.
and Jabba is clearly. This is another thing that doesn't make sense. Why do aliens who's physical, right? He's a slug. He's not attracted to other giant slugs. Like, why is he?
Yeah,
Why are all these aliens
that's a good
attracted to
point.
Earth women? Like, why don't we look as disgusting to them? We would look like a
That's a good
stick bug
point.
or something to a giant slug. Like,
You would think so, yeah.
why would they be sick? How would that even work? you know?
Yeah.
But you're just supposed to go with it. Like he's a big slimy guy. And there's the one scene where he kind of pulls her closer, and then that big puppet tongue is like, comes out, and she's like, ugh. Then he licks her face or something, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And that's about as graphic as it gets. I mean, they're suggesting like she's his sexual slave, but it's much more explicit than that without the skin in this movie.
Yeah, I agree.
And the princess everyone's attracted to everybody else. Like, so all the men in the movie, more or less, are after Ming's daughter,
Mhm.
the princess, who I will admit is smokingly hot.
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And she plays them all for suckers. I think Flash even has the line at one point, does anyone ever trust her twice?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not a great performance on that actor's part, but he does get some good one-liners.
He's charismatic, I would say.
Yes.
And I kept thinking, this is the nicest, not that you don't have heroes that are essentially nice, but like he didn't really have a lot of one-liners and zingers and stuff like that. He's just this very virtuous guy. I felt I thought that was kind of funny that he wasn't. I guess we're just kind of used to the modern hero as being more sarcastic, and the Arnold and Stallone, one-liners and all that kind of stuff, which he doesn't really have
Yeah.
much of in this.
I don't think it's just that though. I mean, I would say that the camera loves him, right? He's easy to watch on screen. He looks great. He's supposedly a quarterback for the New York Jets, and you buy that. Like he's built, and blonde, and he's got a strong jawline. Like, he's a handsome guy,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not like you look at him on camera and think, why'd they cast this guy? It's clear,
Yeah.
and he seems to have good chemistry with the other actors. It's just it doesn't run any deeper than the script, right? I mean, you think of a Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones, or pick one of your other, even Tom Cruise. Now, let's stick with Harrison Ford. In a scene where it's basically just him running up to his close up and hitting his mark, and it's that moment where his face fills the whole frame, and he doesn't have a line, but he's just taking a moment to like process what just happened and or his next steps. With Harrison Ford, there's a lot going on. Like, he is telling a story non-verbally with his face, and this guy is not doing that.
No,
Like, this
no.
guy, it's like he's hitting his marks, and he looks good in the costumes, and he's delivering his lines, and he's not saying the lines like he's delivering his lines, but he's not doing anything more than that. He's not bringing anything more than that to it. And I wonder if this wouldn't have been a more compelling movie if they'd have been able to find a lead that could have anchored it, matched some of the supporting characters.
Yeah.
Like Brian Blessed, or is it Breathed? What's Hawkman?
He's the hawk guy. Yeah, he's great. Yeah, like I say, he's great. Timothy Dalton is probably,
Timothy Dalton.
he's fantastic. He's another actor like Max von Sydow, where he's great in everything. So yeah, you're right. I think that he's just kind of. I wouldn't say that Flash is wooden, but he's just not. There's just, like you said, there's not a lot of depth there.
And saying he's two-dimensional is sounds kind of cruel. I just feel like, as the title character, you want to be bringing at least as much as your supporting characters to the screen. And I don't want to say he sucks, but I think he's outshined by just about everybody else.
Yeah, I would agree.
Possible exception of Dale.
Well, and also I don't know if it's a language thing, but the princess, that Ming's daughter, like you said, she's hot, but her line delivery isn't too great. I think it's a language thing, but yeah, she was I felt like she was the really weak.
I felt like she might have been a model who. We could probably look this up. She might have been a model.
She's Italian. She was like, I looked it up. She was like in like a ton of stuff, but. And you have like Clytus, Peter Wingard is that actor's name. His voice is fantastic.
Yes.
That opening where they're looking at, they're looking at Earth, and Ming is like, what planet is this? And he says, it's called Earth.
Yeah.
I love his, and that was something really funny that I noticed in the beginning that I had never picked up on it as a kid. Did you notice when, Ming is creating these natural disasters on Earth, and he just has these buttons that he can push that are like hailstorm, hurricane,
hot hail.
Yeah, but it's just
hot
like
hail.
You could just press a button and it just creates this, this weather issue.
And of course, they're of the time. They look like NASA, like they're plastic. They're plastic buttons that has, that say earthquake. Somebody has hands painted that on the button, and there's a little analog, not an LED light, but a little bulb behind it flashing. I always think that's funny because they design these sort of spaceships that are models or paintings, but inside the space, like Star Trek, the same way. Inside the spaceship, it's all like, I am the computer. You figured out faster than light travel, but you're still using like radio buttons and toggle switches inside. Anyway, so yeah, and you've got the cast all sort of in different. This was a comic book movie before Marvel really slam dunk defined what a comic book movie is.
Sure.
So there's a lot of spandex, a lot of cartoon design, kind of in the costumes and in the makeup. Really bright colors. Um, Queen soundtrack, which I think is amazing, but sort of um, imposes itself on the movie. Like it's doing a lot of work, but you don't feel like they. I guess they probably would have watched an edit of the film and then just gone into the studio and done what they do,
Right.
and been like, "Here's your thing, right? We're Queen. Say you're welcome."
And I
And
don't think they did. I was thinking about this watching the movie. Did they ever do any other soundtrack work that you can? I mean, did they even like contribute a song to a soundtrack or anything? I
not
thought that
that I
was
can remember. It
that.
did make me think of Dune though, with Toto's
Yeah,
soundtrack, this sort of rock soundtrack. And again, that's a Dino De Laurentiis movie.
but that just watching it, that seemed like a bit of a coup to me that that they were able to get Queen to do this.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, and we hear it in the trailer. It just there, that obviously the listeners can't see the trailer, but that the music of Queen is so. When we talk about the cult classic, that theme, that Flash theme, is one of the most electrifying and memorable moments of aspects of the film. I don't know. I mean, the other thing is that so then they have Zarkov and they wipe his mind, right, with this sort of big ray, and it's a really kind of upsetting scene. We find out later that he was able to pull some mental trick where it didn't wipe his mind, really. But while we're doing it, we're watching his memories sort of flash up on the screen as he regresses to a fetus, basically, before they reprogram him as an agent. And it's just, it's another depiction of torture.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. It just didn't feel like a kid's movie. He has memories of World War II and Hitler, and apparently he lived through that time period. Whether he lived through the Holocaust specifically or was just, a European Jew at the time it was happening. And Clytus has a line where he's like, "Now that guy showed promise," talking about Hitler.
Yeah,
And you're like, "Oh, that's hilarious. That's a really funny joke."
Yeah.
Guys, I don't know. It's just, I don't know exactly who that stuff was pitched at. They felt kind of like inside jokes, and the sexy stuff kind of felt pitched at Dad, right?
That's what I was thinking.
You're
Yeah,
like,
this is to keep
the
Dad
kids are
interested.
sitting right next to him. I just, it's
What
strange.
one thing that I have to say is Flash Gordon is one of these characters that I feel like is our parents' generation, or especially like my dad's generation, because he's a little older. Like, I didn't ever read a Flash Gordon comic when I was a kid
Right.
or anything. I mean, there was a cartoon, I think, maybe when we were kids, or maybe like late 70s or early 80s or something like that. But it seems like one of these. It's kind of like Buck Rogers. It's one of these characters that was kind of before our time. So maybe that's all in the source material. I don't know. Maybe they had,
Yeah, I don't know the source material very well, and maybe the Empress was sort of scantily clad, and maybe it was sort of a sexy, maybe that maybe sci-fi and the sort of sex appeal of the space princess was all kind of like a way of getting around these uptight Earth Moors. Where you could say to scolds, you could say, "Oh, you relax. This is in a different galaxy where then they don't have the hangups we have here in America or whatever." I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Maybe it's referencing that.
Along those lines, I think one thing that I was thinking about watching this is it's a little bit surprised. So this was 1980, so it's a long time ago. It's a little bit surprising to me that there has not been another Flash Gordon movie at some point. Now would seem like the perfect time because you have the technology to do, to do everything. It's a known, to a degree, it's a known property, and Hollywood loves things that are known, and it's a little bit surprising to me that this hasn't happened, considering it's funny to me that it seems like every couple of years we get a new Robin Hood movie, and most of them don't seem to do very well. And it's like, who is clamoring to see Robin Hood again?
Right.
So it's surprising to me that we haven't seen a remake of this, and I would be surprised if we do not see sometime in the pretty near future that one of the studios wouldn't try this again.
Well, let's talk about it. First of all, I don't know what COVID is going to do to the movie industry. I mean, I assume things will kind of resume and normalize once we get on the other side of this virus, but it's hard to know. Like, I was reading an article the other day, we're talking about a vaccine, and the author pointed out, it's like the fastest vaccine that was ever created was mumps, I believe.
And it was like 5 years or something.
Yeah, that was 4 years. That's the record. So it's like,
Yeah.
we keep talking about, maybe we'll have one by this Christmas. And like, well, that would be amazing, considering nobody is working together on the same page. But and assuming the Earth doesn't completely go up in apocalyptic wildfires and sea level rises and everything else, that we're going to get back to a thing where the studios are cranking out movies and people are going to theaters to see them. But yeah, you're right. There's no shortage of weaker properties getting reboots.
Sure.
And you'd think, so a couple of thoughts. Why not? One might be that there's something like you had said, why sometimes can't you find something like Wild at Heart online, is sometimes there's just sort of things get kind of tied up in who has the rights to do what.
Yeah, that's
And
a
you
good.
say,
I hadn't thought about that. That it could be tied up in rights issues.
by the time we spend X million dollars like arguing about who's allowed to do what with this property, forget it. Like, it's we don't expect anything to make that, or it's just too much of a headache when we can make another Robin Hood.
Yeah. Because
The
I
other
guess
thing
it's
is, I
public
think
domain or whatever.
the other impulse I have, which I'm going to argue against myself in just a second, is that the source material is, I touched on it earlier, there's a racism that is baked into it. There's certainly a misogyny that's baked into it. And the kind of model of, so they're in the empire of Mongo, and that's just like baloney place in space. Like, there's no direct analog, right? And there's, I guess, does Ming have his own planet, and then there are moons that orbit that planet? Because then he's not the emperor of the universe; he's just the emperor of this planet and its immediate solar system or something. But the Hawkmen have a planet or a moon, and the forest people have a moon, and then there's supposedly a couple of other things, and Ming keeps them all fighting against each other, and that's how he maintains his power. But I don't know, it just seemed like ridiculously absurd to me on screen. But then, to be fair, we just saw, Avengers Endgame, where there are 5 power stones created at the beginning of the universe, and they're just baloney. It's just absurd. Like, I mean, I guess when Stan Lee conceived of that, it's a comic book for kids, and so you don't think too much about it. But when you have a live action actor talking about, so at the creation of the universe there was these 6 little whatever gems, and soul, time, like, what are you talking about? It's so stupid. Like, so there's a gem that controls time. But I guess any of these comic book movies, if you think about them too much, they break down.
Yeah, I felt like that with this movie, where it's just kind of like the movie doesn't want you to ask too many questions. Like the beginning with, so we didn't really talk about this, but the beginning, they, Flash and Dale are in an airplane, and the airplane
And
crashes.
Zarkov,
Well,
right?
Well, they crash into Zarkov's laboratory or whatever it is,
Yeah, okay.
his facility or whatever, and he has a rocket, and he forces them into the rocket because he has to have people to go with him. But what was the? I didn't understand what the purpose of where he was trying to go. Did that
Well,
make sense to you?
I may have dozed off during this part.
Okay. I may
I
have
watched
too.
I watched it over 2 nights.
Oh, okay.
So,
I watched it all in one sitting, but I did have a hard time keeping my eyes open at times.
uh, it what he put together was what Zarkov put together was that this was an attack.
Oh, that's
That it
right. That's
wasn't
right. Yeah, he
it
was
wasn't just
trying to
some
stop the attack.
environmental
Yeah, that's
crisis.
right.
Yes, he's like, we have to go. And Ming even says that to him later, that I test when I find a new planet like this, I test them with these natural disasters. And if they all just fall to their knees in supplication and believe it's the gods or something, I leave them alone because they're obviously harmless, right?
There would be no
But if
fun
they
in that.
exactly, yeah, and there's no point, they're no threat to me.
Mhm.
But you figured out, you could, I think he says, if they see the hand of Ming, as he did, as he figured out it was an attack, then I realized they are on the verge of becoming a threat now or in the future, and he destroys them utterly to kind of prevent them from ever threatening his rule. So I think he was going, I don't know that he knew it was Ming the Merciless, but he was going to try and trace the source of these disasters that he perceived to be an attack.
Yeah. And so then they go up in the rocket, and then there's like some kind of a vortex or something that pulls them into
Yeah.
the universe. Because I was thinking, like, how long would it take, for them to get to these other planets where there are all these people, but the vortex pulls them into that or whatever. So again, not just don't think
Right.
too hard about it.
Well, in the Star Trek era too. I'm sorry, Star Wars, because Star Trek they actually do track the time it takes to get from here to
Mhm.
there. But in Star Wars, it's just like, hey, we need to go to Tatooine.
Yeah.
Cut to Tatooine, right? And you're like, how much older did everyone get in the course of this, just in the traveling from here to there? I mean, they do have they have the jump to. Doesn't Han always say we're making the jump to light speed?
Yeah.
So it's not faster than light travel. It is light speed travel.
Mhm.
And if you're going from system to system, like that's years, even at light
Yeah.
speed.
But again, that's
Anyway,
one of those things you just don't want to think about it too much.
right? As a kid, you're like, "Hey, get the laser sword out. Let's have some.
Yeah, exactly. And that was, speaking of Star Wars, that was another thing that I was thinking. So this is 3 years after Star Wars. It's the same year that The Empire Strikes Back came out, and the effects look like a movie from the 50s. When they're flying the
Yeah,
rockets around and crashing onto planets and
yeah.
stuff. I mean, the effects were not good.
Well, do you know what the budget was? I mean, some of
Um,
that may have been slightly intentional in terms of
yeah, it's
making it feel like a comic book movie and a cartoon movie, and
I'll check Box Office Mojo here. It's always a little tough to get on these older movies. It's hard to get budgets, but I'll see if I can see what I can find. I'll definitely be able to find what it made, but
and Star Wars made a bundle.
yeah.
So I think that they probably, in that regard, the studio was kind of like, "Hey, great, make Lightning Strike twice."
I
And when
don't
he
know
was like,
what.
"I need more money for the models or whatever," also Lucas and ILM and that was a big thing of
Oh yeah,
his.
what they
He
did was
really
revolutionary. Yeah.
wanted, yes, yes. So he was interested in reinventing where the limit was in terms of that stuff.
So I don't know what it doesn't say what it cost, but it made um, a little over 27 million. So it made about 4 million its opening weekend. It made all of its money in the United States. International, it made $45,000.
Holy mackerel!
Yeah. So I guess it didn't have much of a wide release in well, they re-released this last month.
Really?
That's where the international money came from. I guess they released it in Europe or something last month, July 31st to August 2020, to August 20,
There
2020.
there are some intriguing concepts. For example, on the swamp planet, there's this
I
sort of
liked the
test of
swamp planet
bravery.
stuff. I thought that was pretty cool. And I don't mean to interrupt you again, but that was another thing that scared me as a kid,
Yeah.
and it's still a little bit suspenseful now, is when they have this thing where there's like this kind of tree root thing with a bunch of holes in it, and they put their hand in, and there's this scorpion kind of thing. And it's like a test of manhood or whatever, which I felt. Did you feel like that was directly ripped off from Dune, kind of? Or
I thought it was derivative of a bunch of different
yeah,
sources,
yeah.
because
But
we definitely.
but that's pretty effective. I mean, the effect of the scorpion thing doesn't look great, but it's somewhat suspenseful. And again, I remember being totally freaked out by that as a
Yeah,
kid.
the idea of sticking your hand blindly into this hole in a big gnarly knotty stump thing where if you put your hand in wherever the little critter is, like if you basically put your wrist right in front of its face, it's going to sting you, and that sting is lethal.
But yeah, the tree planet, and then there's a swamp, swamp component. It reminded me, not as effectively done, but it reminded me of Dagobah from The Empire Strikes Back. And I don't think they ripped it off or anything, because it was the same year. I don't think they could have, and that might be in the source material too. But I thought that was one of the more effective parts of the movie, I felt.
Yeah, and there was also what I had totally forgotten is there was a creature in the swamp that gets a hold of Flash at one point, and it's also slightly reminiscent of the Watcher in the Water in Tolkien.
Mm-hmm.
You never really get the scope of the whole thing. In Tolkien, it's sort of tentacles, and in this, it's sort of these sort of spider legs. And then there's this sort of big bladder type inflatable, like something's got him, and there's a sound design thing where it's sort of screeing and squealing, and then this sort of legs are it's trying to stuff it into him into its maw, and its body is sort of squishy, and then somebody shoots it with a laser crossbow, and
I think that
sort
was
of explodes.
I think that's Timothy Dalton that shoots it.
Yeah, he saves him. But I just love that he's got a laser crossbow, because it's like everything else on the planet indicates they all look like Robin Hood. You're like, oh, you guys don't shoot bows and arrows.
They were very Robin.
You got a laser gun, but it looks like a crossbow.
yeah, they were very Robin
Hood. And I had forgotten that it's not that it's done particularly well, except that I'm like, oh, that's cool. That's a cool concept that Flash gets.
Yeah, again, there's stuff in this that I think a reboot or reimagining or whatever with today's technology could be fun.
Maybe it's that if that's maybe you don't get to do that stuff again because it's been done similarly, maybe better in other movies since, right? I mean, is a monster in the swamp that tries to pull you down, does that feel original? Does that feel fresh now?
No.
Flying Hawkmen, like how do you?
And I kept thinking as far as a reboot that maybe studios think it's too corny or whatever, but I feel like give this to the guy who did Guardians of the Galaxy. Like I think he could knock this out of the park, because I think he would have the right tone of kind of cheesiness, but still not too cheesy.
Chris Pratt could probably do Flash Gordon.
Yeah, you're right. He would be a good Flash Gordon. How many franchises can he have, though?
I know. Well, that's yeah. I mean, and I love Chris Pratt. I don't get tired of watching Chris Pratt, but you saturate on anyone after a while.
Yeah.
And there's just only so many different iterations of yourself you can play on screen before it starts to muddy and blur. But my point just being that, I mean, there's lots of other actors that could do it, but
he would be a good choice, though. Yeah, he'd be a great.
There are people that could do it, that could carry And I think you would want to try and keep some of the sex appeal. That actually felt really central to the whole thing, including the use of Queen as the uh, soundtrack,
Mhm.
you know? And there was a sort of a BDS bondage
That's
ele-
exactly what I was
element to the
thinking, that there was
costume design.
definitely a bit of a bondage thing going on there,
And you know,
which
I
was
just
what
sort
made
of
it feel weird.
Flash Gordon as a property, like being the stuff of adolescent fantasy, specifically adolescent boy fantasy.
Right.
But like, oh, I'm a football player and a spaceman and a hero, and I get the girl and all the girls want me and they're all like insanely hot. But there's the girl next door and then there's the exotic space princess. I guess it's only those two.
Mhm. Yeah, but there were other. I mean, he wasn't interacting with him, but there were other women in the background that were kind of scantily clad and all of that. Um, One thing that I thought was really funny about the costume design was that I've always loved that Flash shirt,
Yeah.
but it struck me as very funny watching the movie. His outfit that he wears is basically khaki pants and a
Uh-huh.
white like ringer tee with his name on it. you know.
Right.
And did you notice when there's a part where they execute him basically? Ming executes him. They send him to a gas
Yes,
chamber.
there's an
Yeah, so
execution
that was
scene.
another, upsetting thing for children. But so the princess saves him by they inject him with something and bring him back to life. But I thought it was really funny. They had a uh, like a coffin for him, and it said Flash Gordon Human on it, and it was like the Flash Gordon name written on there was like the logo of the movie.
Right. Right. Right.
Like they went to
They
all
they
this
honored
trouble to. Yeah,
the branding. Well,
yeah.
so we're getting into an interesting little nitpicky area here, but I so he has this sort of football-esque thing where he's throwing these metal eggs that are football size around and knocking, and it's as much comic as it is action. And ultimately, they subdue him. This is early in the movie, and Ming sentences him to death. Excuse me, and it's like they're going to make an example of him.
Mhm.
Um, but then there's all this pomp and circumstance about his official execution. Like, I don't. They kind of escort him up to the chair and they give him a hood for his face, and it's like for Ming the Merciless, a gas chamber seems incredibly benign, right? Why
Mhm.
wouldn't they publicly torture this guy to death? That seems more in line with like what they do to his own daughter when they discover her treason. Is they've got something that we don't see, but something called boar worms that she's
Yeah,
terrified
yeah.
of. And you're kind of like, so the guy who employs boar worms on his own daughter executes this alien, he's brutalizing Earth just for the fun of it, literally. And we get this Earthling who like causes a ruckus in his throne chamber in defiance, and he gives him like what seems like an honorary execution. I just didn't make any sense to me. Like, why wouldn't they? Do you know what I mean? Did that
Yeah, I
seem
agree.
weird
I
to you?
didn't
Like,
really
why are
think
they
about that either.
honoring Flash Gordon? You know?
In all honesty, I mean, why did they look at him any more than like almost like an animal or something? He's from this completely different planet, and it's weird that they would even care to that
He said
degree. I don't
he says he will be executed publicly, but the public execution doesn't seem to be any more public than the throne room in which he announces it,
know. Mm-mm.
right? I
Yeah.
mean, everyone's right here. Just kill him. Like, why? You know? I don't know.
So I'm sure I've said this on other '80s movies that we've covered, but I think some of the answers to some of our questions as to some of the weird stuff that was going on. And I think this is a big difference between movies of this era and movies of today. And I think it's just cocaine, basically. I,
Yeah.
I, I don't know about some of these quote unquote more serious movies, but I know I've read a lot of stuff and seen some documentaries and things about like the Blues Brothers and Caddyshack and some of those comedy movies where literally cocaine was figured into the budget of the movie. And,
Wow.
the people were just, they were just all partying every night. And I wouldn't be surprised if this was one that there was a lot of that,
It
going
was
on.
Hollywood, baby.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that's a big difference between then and now. Some of these weird things that were in movies is I think just there was a lot of drug use going on.
Well, why don't we go ahead and give it our final verdict, and then maybe if you want to just, we can also digress and talk about some of the other stuff we've been
Sure.
watching. So, would you recommend this to our listeners?
I would say here's the thing about this. It's not fun enough, I don't think, from a campiness standpoint, that this is really like a party movie. I feel like people who saw this as children and have nostalgia about it, it'd be a good idea to revisit it. This got a bit of a kind of a bump a few years ago. Did you ever see Ted, the movie about the talking with Mark Wahlberg, the talking?
I don't think so. I saw clips of it.
Okay, Ted is actually pretty good, but so Ted and Mark Wahlberg are best friends, basically, and they love this movie. So they referenced this movie, and they actually brought Sam, what is his name? Sam Jones. He's in the movie. He's in this Ted movie. So this got it a little bit of attention, a few years ago. But I just, like you said, it's kind of slow. I just don't think it's fun enough to it. It's silly and cheesy, but it's just not that much fun. So I would kind of have to. I'm sadly kind of have to say I wouldn't recommend it.
I agree. Along the same lines. I get that it's a cult classic. I get that there's enough to talk about, and there are enough bright points that sort of make it memorable as a movie we saw as kids, and like the sexy stuff and the torture stuff. You're just kind of like, what's going on here? And the soundtrack, you're like, whoa.
I can't imagine if you showed it to kids today, they would enjoy this.
No, I mean, I just didn't have that much fun with it.
No. Yeah, it kind of pains
felt
me a
like,
little bit, but yeah.
It felt like those sequences were supposed to be fun. Like, they're like, we're all having a great time, right? And I'm kind of like, I'm not. Like, I'm just not. You don't have me. And when you talk about other kind of unicorn cult classics like The Room, which is unquestionably awful, worse than this in so many ways, it is inexplicably watchable from start to finish.
Mm-hmm.
And fun might be too strong a word, but I remember I went to see it with Tom and Stephanie on my birthday. It might have been my 40th birthday. We went to a midnight screening of The Room, which I had never seen.
Mm-hmm.
And I did have fun. I don't know that the movie itself is particularly fun if you just sat and watched it alone. But as terrible as it was, I was engaged in watching the movie actively from the beginning to the end.
Mm-hmm.
And Flash Gordon lost me a few times where I just had to like pause it and take a break, or I watched it in 2 nights, because the first night I was just kind of like, this is literally putting me to sleep. And and then I came back, I'm like, all right, I got to watch the end of Flash Gordon. But that's a very different tone.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, I would say I'm not going to try and dissuade if somebody's like, oh, I want to watch it. Okay, great. Go watch it. I was interested to revisit it because it did make an impression on me when I was a kid.
Yeah, same here.
And there were lots of WTF moments in it, but I don't know that those things make it an entertaining film to watch.
And it's not a so bad it's good. It wasn't like they were trying
Right.
to make a great movie and it just didn't turn out and it's really bad. you got the feeling that everybody knew this, they were making a cornball movie, basically. I didn't, uh, I don't think they felt they were making Star Wars.
The campy stuff, the campy elements of it, to me, did not jive with the serious elements of it. And the serious elements of it are things like when they're wiping Zarkov's mind and we have his memories of Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. And the cruelty of this, and he's begging, please don't take my mind.
Mm-hmm.
It's upsetting. And the torture of the emperor's daughter, and um, the way that Clytus dies, and the cruelty that Clytus and all of Ming's people exhibit towards everyone. It just, and the psychosexual stuff that felt not just mature beyond a kid's movie, but cruel, like sadistically sexual. What he makes, I think in the trailer, it even says, you hear Ming's voice saying, prepare her for my pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, oh God, it's like, it's upsetting.
Yeah.
And I don't think that then you can't just have a sequence where the football player in space has a sort of a football match against guards that kind of look like they're wearing football helmets, and they all kind of like Benny Hill around as he bonks them on the head with, you know what I mean? It's like, no, I'm still a little rattled by, Ming's sexual, he's going to make her his sex slave. Like,
well, and there was even some like kind of sexual stuff between him and the daughter too, which was kind of creepy, a little bit kind of hinted at, and I don't know.
I mean, I'm not saying that stuff is in and of itself inadmissible in movies. There's some dark stuff. Like we talked about Dune. The Harkonnens are utterly despicable. Like they are a regime of cruel sadists. And their whole planet is this nightmare, sadistic place. People have heart plugs that they can pull out, and I mean, it's really upsetting. But Dune
it's not
was
for
not
kids.
Was not for kids, and it was not trying to be some campy like now a funny football action sequence. It's like, no, the Harkonnens are horror people. They're nightmare people. So I guess in terms of recommending to go see it, spend your time, 2 thumbs down on this one. But you had mentioned there's some stuff coming up you're excited about. Dune, the trailer dropped.
Yeah, I was going to say, what did you think of that? So you being the, more the resident Dune fan, whereas I just saw the original movie for the first time a couple of months ago. So what did you think of the trailer?
Where I am with it right now is a little disappointed.
Oh, okay.
And I'll tell you why. I think it looks great. I love the cast. I think he did a brilliant job of casting it without seeing anybody do too much in the trailer. And I am very excited to see it. It feels a little bit, just from the trailer and what they sort of skate through in the trailer, it almost feels like he's remaking the 1980 Dune that David Lynch made.
Yeah, and I was struck by that. I thought, wow, having just seen it, this feels a lot like the David Lynch movie.
And with a sort of
a better sheen.
If I were gonna make that movie, I would do it like this, but I'd still be making that movie. And I don't know that you can make Dune differently. Like David Lynch may have brilliantly pared down, into 2 hours. You may have to cut away so much of the source material that what you're left with is the basic arc of this Paul Atreides character.
Mm-hmm. Because I felt like it looked like the Lynch movie with just better effects, basically. And more modern filmmaking techniques.
I need to go back and reread the books, because I do remember the books are very elaborate. Like it's very detailed, and the universe building of it is meticulous and unique. And I mean, yes, it's a Messiah story, but it's complicated. In other words, Neo's a good guy, and there's no question about that. The books raise an issue that it's sort of like, so the Fremen at least paint Paul Atreides as a Messiah, but even Paul Atreides is uncomfortable with that concept. And is that a good thing? Is having a Messiah a good thing? Right? When they're making it this religious prophecy being fulfilled, when really in the book it outlines that it's also the product of generation after generation of like selective eugenics, basically breeding, and it's like they're trying to make this prophecy come true until there's a male that's born able to take this spice that will complete this sort of transformation into this super being. So it's interesting because it's not, oh, God put his son on earth and it's the fulfillment of the prophecy. They have been engaging in what is essentially eugenics for, like in the book, I think it's millennia, and to get to this point, and Paul Atreides happens to be the product of that. Whereas if he's a Messiah, he is faultless and blameless and can do no wrong, right? Because he is a deity. But Paul Atreides doesn't think of himself as a deity, but suddenly he has godlike powers. So it really unpacks this sort of Messiah arc in interesting ways. And it gets more into all the other people that use the spice and the way, and the mentats and all the different, and the guild members, and this stuff seems to have really potent effects on the human physiology and brain, and lots of different people use it in different ways. It just gets really, really broad and three-dimensional and interesting science fiction ways, and you just don't have time in a movie to plumb those kind of depths.
If you had to guess, do you think we talked about this at I think previously with the Lynch movie, but I'm sure I probably said something along these lines, but Star Wars, I think, works so well because it's so easy for people to understand the characters. You've got a pirate and a good wizard and a bad wizard and a princess. Everybody can understand that.
Right.
With this, do you think that is Dune kind of too weird to appeal to just the masses, basically? I mean, is this going to be like Dune fans and hardcore sci-fi fans are going to be into this, but maybe it doesn't make $1 billion or whatever the studio is hoping for?
I don't know. I think you really put your finger on it with Star Wars. I think it's got to be, they had laser swords. That was cool. And they are kind of a religion that can kind of move things with their mind using the Force.
But it's never too deep, it's just kind of basic,
It never gets deeper than the human thing, like, I am your father. What? No. Like, you can get your head around that. It's like, oh, the guy I don't want to be my father. My father's gone. I want to idolize my father. It turns out my father's actually complicated. Right? I mean, everybody can relate to that in some way, whether you have experienced it or not. You can imagine, like, oh, snap, what if I was adopted and it was, somebody I didn't want it to be. Whereas Dune is really world building, and it just may be to the material. It makes a great novel and a great series of novels, but I don't know. I don't know if it'll translate, the richness of it'll translate to the screen or not. I'm excited to see it.
I think they definitely have the right person doing it.
Yeah.
If
Blade Runner 2049 is any indication, this guy can take a beloved property and like really carry it forward. And I love that movie.
Oh, me too. Yeah.
I was telling you, And we're getting a little long in the tooth here, but we missed last week, so
That's
let's
okay.
indulge.
Yeah.
I was telling you about some of the TV I've been watching. I've been watching Lovecraft Country, The Boys season 2, and Raised by Wolves,
Yeah.
which are 3 very different projects, but 3 that I think. And you had texted me back that you haven't watched any of them. You
No.
haven't seen. Oh
I haven't
man,
seen any of them.
I think you would dig all 3 of these in the same way that I dig them, for different reasons. I mean, they're very different. Lovecraft is how am I spacing on his name? Get Out. It's
Jordan Peele.
Jordan Peele. Thank you. And it's HBO money, so the production design on it is lavish and it looks amazing, and it really weaves the horrors of mid 20th century racism with the horrors of H.P. Lovecraft.
Now let me ask you
And
about that. Like I don't think I would be all that interested in it if it didn't have the Lovecraft aspect of it. So is it very heavy on the racism aspect and like light on the Lovecraft part, or is the Lovecraft part a big component?
I'll say yes.
Okay. All right.
So it varies a little episode to episode. But all episodes have elements of both. So what drives these African American characters forward is essentially Lovecraftian. There's sort of ancient gods and a hidden language and horrors and tomes and monsters and spells, and that's all very Lovecraftian stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But then every episode, the places it takes them tend to be white communities that are hostile to them because they are Black.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know that it feels experimental.
Okay.
And it feels like they gave him a lot of money to be experimental. And he gets to do it episode by episode, which means by its very nature, it could, not every episodic thing feels disjointed, but this feels a little disjointed episode to episode. You're like, oh, this one's about the house. Oh, this one's about the weird white wizards that abduct them.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this one's about that, right? So it's like each episode has a kind of a mini theme, but it's the same characters trying to unravel whatever they've gotten themselves mixed up in. Of the 3 that I mentioned, it's the more out of the box. I mean, I don't want to say it runs hot and cold, but it runs like hot and warm. Some of it I'm like, woo, that was amazing. And then others I'm like, oh, I didn't like that as much.
Okay.
But the performances are terrific. I don't know. I do think it's worth, unreservedly, I think it's worth checking out. Raised by Wolves, I think you would flip over. I'm riveted by it.
How far into it are you? Because the
I'm
reason
up to date.
Okay, because the reason why I ask is I believe it was NPR did a review of it, and they said that the first 3 episodes are directed by Ridley Scott, and they're great. And then after that, it's somebody else, and it kind of goes off the rails. They said like it's fantastic, and then by the end, they kind of couldn't recommend it. So,
well, they have probably watched it all. Right?
Yeah,
They're probably given the whole series to see,
right.
And I haven't been given the whole.
And
series.
I don't say that. I hope that that doesn't like ruin it for you, but
no, I can see that. I mean, I think if you watch the pilot delivers.
Mm-hmm.
Like the pilot feels like pure Ridley Scott. The pilot is so good, and by the end of the pilot, you're like, oh man, like you just can't wait. And that does carry on. I guess I can see that carrying on for episode 2 and 3. Then once everything's sort of established, we get out of the kind of opening part, and then we're kind of like, and now we're figuring out how to get from place to place, and these people are going there, and this is what's happening with these guys. And it's a little less like starter energy of like, who is this and what's happening and why are we here? And it's more like, okay, so these people are trying to get to the top of that, and those people are trying to get over to this thing, right? And then it starts, like Game of Thrones, it starts cutting back between, like, now we're here with these folks, and now we're going to see what these folks are doing, and now we go, so the kind of, it settles into a rhythm that is not as exciting as the sort of startup action, because it doesn't explain anything. It does a very good job of, in casual dialogue, you get little pieces of information that you're like, oh, so they're a colony ship. Like, but it was like, that's why you got on this colony ship. Like, nobody is just didactically helping the audience. And I like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think you would really dig it.
Of the 3 shows, it's definitely the one that I'm the most interested in, although all 3 of them I'm interested in. So yeah.
And The Boys is Carl Urban, and I think he does a great job of anchoring it. But the person who really steals The Boys is the guy that plays Homelander.
Yeah, I need to watch. I need to watch The Boys. I definitely.
You should start on season 1, and it doesn't land the hook as hard in the pilot as Raised by Wolves does. But it's really interesting, and I'm into season 2, and season 2 feels a little bit like they're still trying to figure out, I don't know. Season 2 feels like season 1 was a smash hit, and then they scrambled to figure out what they were going to do in season 2.
Oh, okay. That's kind of a bummer when that happens.
It's not to say it's bad. It's not to say it's bad. But season 1 ended with such a like, whoa. Then you're kind of like, where are they going to go from here? And you could sort of feel them being like, where are we going to go from here?
Yeah.
There's a lot of great stuff so far in season 2. So after talking with you about it, I would say start with Raised by Wolves.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with that. Now, the only thing that I've seen recently is I saw Tenet in the theater.
Yeah, tell me about it.
I don't really want to say very much because I don't want to ruin anything, but just that I'm sure you would like it. It's really good. It's a very...
Christopher Nolan, I can't imagine him making a movie I didn't at least enjoy watching.
It's
not my favorite Christopher Nolan movie, fine. You know what I'm saying? But it's like he makes big,
and I think people are thinking this is lesser Nolan, but I thought it was very good. It's my only criticism, and almost every review I've seen of this has said the same thing. Unless you absolutely have to see it in the theater, I would say watch it at home so you can have the subtitles on, because he does this kind of frustrating thing where a lot of the dialogue is going on while there's really loud music in the background, or really loud, like there's a part where they're on these like kind of high speed sailboats and having a conversation while there's like this roaring engine sound in the background, and so a lot of it, I just wasn't 100% sure what they were saying. I mean, I could get the gist of it,
so
but
funny.
Yeah, that was, and I don't know if it's almost like, it almost seemed like he did it on purpose to make it more, I don't know, sort of like you had to really pay attention or whatever, but the concept is really great. I don't know how much from the trailer, but it's a really cool concept. It's basically,
I get that this time bending, he loves to play with time.
There's time bending, and this is kind of his, I mean, he's made no, and I saw this at the Alamo Draft House, and they, the Alamo does a lot of cool things, and they had a kind of like a short film before the movie about spy movies, kind of the history of spy movies, and they have some quotes from Christopher Nolan where he makes no secret about the fact that he would like to do a James Bond movie someday, and this is kind of his spy movie. But it's
like it's his audition for that.
sort of, yeah, but it's what you don't typically have um the time bending stuff
Right.
with but one thing that I felt with this, a lot of times, I mean, I'll readily admit with spy movies, a lot of times with spy movies, I get lost pretty quickly as far as, why are they meeting with this person and why is this happening? I never felt that with this. And many of the reviews that I've seen, they said, oh, I'm going to have to watch this multiple times to understand it. I didn't feel like it was difficult to understand what was going on. I thought there wasn't much of that where, you're just like, I don't know what's happening,
Difficult to understand what they were saying.
Yeah, except for difficulty understanding what they were saying at times. But
It's so funny because when I saw Batman, Bane was that way when I saw it in the theater.
Yeah, people
they did such
remarked about that as
interesting
well. Yeah,
audio design for him, but in the theater, I couldn't make out. I'm like, what did he say?
Yeah, so there's definitely some of that
talking like this, but it was music, and it's just sort of the wash of like. I'm like, come on, you have control of that. You could bump that up so I could know what the dude is saying.
Yeah,
and it felt deliberate.
Yeah, and it could be, but yeah, I definitely, whenever you see this, I'd look forward to talking to you about it because it's a really cool movie, and you have I'm drawing a blank on the guy's name who is from the Twilight movies, who's going to be the next Batman. Pattinson, Robert Pattinson.
Yes,
he's really good in it. I mean, everybody's
he's a good actor.
Yeah, all of the acting is really good, but I really enjoyed it. I went to see it with my parents, and there just wasn't any. Surprisingly, they love the Alamo. And it was kind of it was like that, or see like Bill and Ted, which they haven't seen any of the other Bill and Ted movies. So it was funny. I knew going in, I thought this is going to be a little bit weird for them, but they seemed to like it well enough, and they weren't. I kind of had to explain it to them afterwards, what it meant and everything. But yeah, it's I really liked it. But back to what you were saying earlier about COVID and theaters and everything, this was kind of the first real big release during the virus, because this was supposed to come out in July, and I was reading some of the numbers on it. It cost $200 million, and it did like $29 million the first weekend and like $2 million last weekend. So in like 3,000 theaters. So I don't think people are ready to go back to the movies.
I'm not.
Yeah. And it was, the Alamo does a great job. I mean, I felt very, very safe there. You couldn't go in without a mask, and it was us and one other person in the whole theater. So, so I felt fine about it. But yeah, if this lingers on for a long time, I love going to the movies, and that would be one of those things where if going to the theaters, it will always exist, I would think. But if it kind of dies off, if people are just like, I'm just going to stay home, I think that would be sad,
It would be sad because I enjoy, and I like going to places like the Alamo where you can get a beer and you can get food. And like, that's an evolution. We didn't have that when we were kids.
Yeah.
But as an adult, I'm like, this is the only way to see movies. There are high end ones where you're sitting in like an airplane chair and there's table service.
Yeah.
And there's lower end ones. I mean, I guess you can always go out and get food, but there tends to be waiters that'll come and like take your order. But some of them are, a more expensive ticket and a more luxury seat than others.
Yeah.
But I just like the idea to be in the seating is, it assumes you're there with somebody. So the seating is generally like two chairs with a little table in between or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, it really fits with I'm like, if nothing else, I want to have a beer while I'm watching the movie. Like I want to relax, and I don't just want popcorn with that grease on it. Maybe I'll have sliders, or maybe, I don't know, maybe I'll have popcorn, but I want the sriracha popcorn, please.
Yeah.
I dig it.
Yeah, I do too.
And it gives them a chance to make a little more money. Obviously, the food and drink prices are a little jacked up, the way they always are.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't like to eat a ton of candy and soda anyway. Not
No.
that necessarily beer and sliders are better for you per se, but I just like to eat more adult food than garbage snacks.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
Yep.
Let's call it, because we're getting to a little long in the tooth on this one, but I think we can go ahead and say let's do the dead zone for next time.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I like
Great.
that idea.
So all of you thousands and millions of people who are listening to us, go watch the dead zone, and we can all talk about it together on our next episode.